I just watched a very interesting video where Shane Mcguigan was talking about working with Daniel Dubois and the kind of changes and improvements he's looking to make with him. Now, a tree is known by its fruits. And if you look at Shane Mcguigan fighters, they are typically fluid. They move well. I mean, we've seen improvements in terms of fluidity with Anthony Fowler, but even more so with Lawrence Okolie under Shane Mcguigan. And that is absolutely what Daniel Dubois needs. This is why, as soon as I heard Daniel Dubois had split from Mark Tibbs and was joining Shane Mcguigan, I said, I think this is actually a better fit for Daniel Dubois as a trainer, because Shane Mcguigan understands biomechanics. He's a guy who, I'm not saying he's going to turn Daniel Dubois into Tyson Fury in terms of fluidity, but he can definitely loosen him up a bit and introduce more unpredictability in terms of what the opponents of Daniel Dubois are going to face. Because Dubois is very upright, very rigid, very tight. It's all very rudimentary, to be honest with you. Not that there's anything horribly wrong with what Daniel Dubois does, but it's just very basic. It's very Frank Bruno-esque. And Shane Mcguigan clearly wants to introduce more dynamic boxing into Daniel Dubois' game, more dynamic movement and so on. He specifically said that he wanted to quicken Daniel Dubois' feet up and that he wanted to work on his head movement. He also talked about changing over time, not immediately, but over time, adjusting or changing Daniel Dubois' stance, the way he stands. But he said he didn't want to introduce too many changes too quickly because Dubois might not feel comfortable. So he's fighting Bogdan Daniel Dubois in, a couple weeks? Therefore, you're not going to expect too much of a difference in that fight. Shane Mcguigan says he looks at Daniel Dubois as a long-term project because he's only 23 years of age. So this is a guy that Shane Mcguigan can really mold over the course of time. As long as they stay together, he can mold him to exactly what he wants him to be over the course of time and several years and produce exactly the kind of heavyweight that he thinks he can get out of this individual. So I'm very interested to see where this union goes between them. As I say, Shane Mcguigan understands biomechanics, body mechanics, whatever you want to call them. He understands how to get more fluidity out of a fighter. And the feet especially. I was watching him take Daniel Dubois in the pads, and he was getting Daniel Dubois to move his feet after he punches and just do different things, throw punches in a different way. So, for example, there was one sequence where he was getting Dubois to throw, I think it was a 1-2, then come back with a left hook. But he was trying to get him to throw a long left hook where he kind of almost sways back while he's throwing it. This is something Daniel Dubois doesn't typically do. He also talked about trying to get more snap in Daniel Dubois' punches and trying to get him to turn his shots over more. Because when you are as stiff and robotic as Dubois is, you're not going to rotate and articulate as well as you possibly could if you are more fluid. You see? So all the signs I'm seeing based upon that video with Shane Mcguigan, all the signs I'm seeing are very encouraging. Shane Mcguigan, as I expected, knows exactly what to do in terms of making Daniel Dubois more dynamic, making him more fluid, and so on. Again, doesn't mean he's going to be a Tyson Fury. At the end of the day, you are limited by a fighter's physiology. So you're never going to see him look that slick. But can he look more fluid than he has up until this point? Absolutely, yes, he can. And Shane Mcguigan's the guy to show you that that can and will be done. So Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I've already made a video about this a couple weeks ago, whenever it was, a week or two ago, when the news initially came out. But after hearing Shane Mcguigan talk more extensively about this particular partnership, it's even more encouraging and even more intriguing. Now, the question which Daniel Dubois really needs to answer, beyond technical improvements that people are expecting or hoping that he can make, being more fluid and being more unpredictable in the ring in terms of, being less robotic, less textbook, I guess you could say. Beyond that, people are going to be asking about Daniel Dubois' heart, because he quit against Joe Joyce. They say it was a fractured eye socket, whatever the case may be. Daniel Dubois knows that future opponents and his rivals in general have seen weakness in him. He even described this in this particular video. He said, now people have seen weakness, maybe they want to fight me. Oh, yes, they will. And they're going to put it on him more so than they did before. And Daniel Dubois needs to be ready for that. In boxing and perhaps in other sports and in other areas of life, there are a lot of people who will tell you, once a quitter, always a quitter. Well, that may be the case for the majority of people, but there are always exceptions. And one of the exceptions, according to the late great Customado, was Larry Holmes. Customado said that Larry Holmes was the only guy who turned from being a cowardly fighter, a quitter, into being a fighter who had one of the biggest hearts that you'll ever see. Because Larry Holmes was known in the amateurs as being a bit scared, as being a kind of guy who would, fold and pack up and go home when things got a bit too rough. That's the reputation he had coming out of the amateurs. And Customado talked about that. But in the pro game, Larry Holmes showed tremendous heart on numerous occasions, even when he was way past his best. And he came back after a 2.5-year layoff with no tune-up fights, wasn't even in great shape. Only had a month to train or whatever he said it was against the prime Mike Tyson. He showed tremendous heart even in that fight. So Larry Holmes managed to find his inner warrior, despite not showing that much heart and not showing that much intestinal fortitude previously. He found it somewhere. So it can be done. We need to now see if Daniel Dubois can do it. Now, with Shane Mcguigan implementing certain technical improvements, biomechanical improvements, and so on, that may help to disguise or put a barrier between the opponent and any potential psychological weakness that Daniel Dubois may have. Because they have to get through the technical improvements first. They have to get through the physicality and all that kind of stuff first before they can get to his heart and test his heart. You understand? Because in the Joe Joyce fight, it was Dubois who was lacking technically. And he was going at Joyce and he was trying to get to him, but it just wasn't working. Joyce was sticking a jab on him, and that was enough to break Daniel Dubois' spirit, bust his eye, break his will. If Daniel Dubois improves sufficiently, he'll be able to do something similar to that to other people. Maybe he won't be up on his toes like Joyce, but again, if you can improve him technically, making him a bit more fluid, then he'll be able to rely on things like a solid left jab and just outboxing people. It won't always be him going in there looking for a knockout. So that is something I'm looking and expecting from Daniel Dubois. But eventually, once you start going up through the ranks, someone's going to get to that heart again. And I want to see what kind of work Daniel and maybe even Shane are doing on strengthening his resolve. You know, Daniel Dubois being so young, just 23, he has the demeanor of somebody even younger than that. People don't all mature at the same rate mentally and emotionally. He might be, and I'm meaning no disrespect when I say this, he might be mentally and emotionally where a teenager might be, rather than a 23-year-old man. So perhaps with a few more years, more maturity, more time with Shane, who's a very good trainer, and hopefully he understands boxing psychology as well as he understands body mechanics and what have you. And if that is the case, then perhaps they will be able together to strengthen Daniel Dubois' resolve. And when you introduce survival skills, actually, that can also help give the appearance that you've strengthened somebody's resolve. Because against Joe Joyce, he didn't know how to get out of the way of the jab. You know? So he's getting hit in the jab, hit with a jab, hit in the eye constantly. If that eye starts swelling up, well, you need to do something to avoid getting hit on the eye again, or to minimize the amount you're getting hit on that eye. If he'd known how to do that in that fight, maybe he wouldn't have had to take a knee, or maybe he wouldn't have felt like he had to take a knee. Maybe he could have avoided getting hit constantly on the eye, done different things, moving his head, switched up his tactics, switched up his stance, switched up his defensive posture. You understand what I mean? That could have got him through the fight where it could have gone the distance. Maybe he would have won. Who knows? So anyway, just some food for thought there. And my musings on this new partnership between Daniel Dubois and Shane Mcguigan. Come and join me on Patreon and access my weekly no-holds-barred, censorship-free podcast where we lift the lid on a wide range of controversial topics. It's not mainstream friendly, it's not politically correct, but that's the whole point. We dare to stand as a beacon of reason against an army of insanity. Just head on over to my Patreon page and select the tier called Hatman Hot Topics. You'll gain access to a minimum of 2 hours of exclusive content every single week, including podcasts, videos, interviews, live stream Q&A sessions, as well as my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. Not to mention a vast back catalog of hundreds of hours of previous episodes. You can listen via the Patreon app with the option to download in high quality MP3. We've also got a Discord server where you can come and chat and hang out with myself and other members. There's no contract, no commitment, and you can cancel at any time. So come and join our community of free and critical thinkers by signing up with me here on Patreon today.